Andrew.
What's up, dude?
What's up, man?
How you doing?
Doing well, doing well.
Word. Let's roll.
So, downtown, or do we head to the Golden Gate Bridge?
Oh yeah, let's go over the bridge.
Let's do it.
Go to like Hawk Hill, you know?
So, I actually know a fair bit about you from my former roommate, Emma Salinas, who
Oh, wow.
speaks super highly.
Okay.
And then, I think a few weeks after you launched Deep Tech Week, which I thought was super cool. How did that come about?
Oh, Deep Tech Week. Yeah, that's it's kind of a funny story. It actually I sort of like tricked myself into doing it somehow. It actually started off as like a single event that I was going to do on just one day, and it was like late 2023. Everyone's just AI all the time, constantly, and I was like, man, there should be like more hardware stuff in the city. Like all my friends are kind of building hardware stuff, and I thought it'd be cool to have like a single day kind of hardware showcase. Where people just like bring their tech out, bring their robot, bring their 3D printer they're working on, jet engine, whatever, as kind of like a like contrast to like the endless stream of like AI hackathons. And then I was, I kind of like was looking for a job outside of the fusion industry because I was kind of getting bored of just being an engineer, even though it was like a dream job, and I was like bored, so I was like, okay, something's wrong. And then I had this interview in Miami with this VC fund, and seemed really cool, seemed like a cool fund. Didn't want to move to Miami. Was like super focused on SF. It's kind of my home.
Interview in Miami with a VC fund. Interesting.
Yeah, Founders Fund. Yeah, very mysterious. Yeah, it's tons of VC funds out in Miami. Yeah, I just didn't want to move to Miami. And so I kind of had this plan. I was like, well, if I take my hardware showcase, and there was like hundreds of people signed up for this, so like there was interest. And if I turned it into like a deep tech week in SF, I can maybe like bait myself or bait a firm, cool VC fund, into hiring me. Be like, oh, like flex your whatever network access or something like that. And then it started off as like 5 events, and the whole thing just kind of exploded the last minute and just got insane. And there was like 40, 50 events and like these crazy parties and stuff. And there's 2 things that happened afterwards. One is I was like significantly in debt as a business owner. So I had to start my own company to sponsor my own O1 visa because I wasn't sure which firm I was going to join.
Been there.
And so I kind of like, at the end of it, I was now stuck with like a company, a bunch of company debts, but this cool thing that everyone loved, and I thought I could probably turn that into a business. And so now I kind of do that, sort of by accident. Yeah.
You're Canadian, right?
Yeah, I'm
Cool.
from Vancouver.
Nice. I went to Canadian school for a bit growing up, and also lived in Montreal for a bit.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I lived in Montreal a couple years.
Yeah, I remember at the beginning of school every day we would sing the Canadian national anthem. So, weird fun fact.
Yeah, go communism.
I know you also run this group chat, like a deep tech group chat. Did that come before or after Deep Tech Week?
That started beforehand. Yeah, that started as a way of just like kind of trading notes and talking about stuff. It's actually Discord channels. What were you thinking about?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's like 800 people ish, kind of, and it's kind of growing organically at this point. But yeah, started off as a way to like put together SPVs into companies, early stage things, where everyone has like a few grand they want to put in, and it's sort of just a way to like share those and trade those around, and kind of anyone puts whatever they want. Now there's like more institutional investors in there. It's sort of just like angel investors. Now there's like more institutional investors that sometimes also share like early stage deals, or also technical founders and stuff. So it's kind of just like a little thing,
Totally
kind of
see
my world.
why A16Z has you as a scout.
Well, actually, that started beforehand. That was based on 2 things. One, I started this event series called AI Salon, and so they thought I had
a couple of those.
they thought I had some kind of alpha on something, but then also I just wrote a bunch of stuff on LK99 and went viral on Twitter. And that was the real reason. That was actually why they like we want the LK99 guy.
That was a fun time. I think we're gonna have an LK99 that actually works at some point in our lives.
No doubt, we will for sure. Yeah, maybe LK69. Yeah, that was interesting because it was kind of like made up out of nowhere. Like, like it was sort of just like there's actually tons of papers that come out constantly of like questionable superconductivity measurements, and for some reason that thing just went so insanely viral. It struck a nerve with the world. Um, Probably there like needs to be more sort of like stunning, dramatic, optimistic narratives that make people feel like, oh my god, the world could change any moment, for the better, because we're kind of used to like, oh, just natural disasters and
Yeah.
the government is terrible or something like that.
It's interesting to see that venture was historically a very optimistic and ambitious asset class as a whole, and then slowly it's drifted into kind of B2B SaaS, generic AI agent mud. What do you think it's going to take for the entire industry to remember its origins?
I think that shift has probably already started in a lot of ways. I think probably the common sentiment is, maybe it's not common. I don't know. It's my sentiment. Whatever. AI kind of solves like the last sort of like bottleneck to software deployment, which was like talent and availability of like skilled developers. And so, if you're not building like foundational new sort of AI model or some kind of research project, or your business doesn't have like extremely sticky kind of network effects as a moat, then what is the barrier to entry for a newcomer competitor apart from just like better features or something like that? And so kind of like winners, like one size fits all, winner take whole market, but it fits all things badly, like kind of Salesforce style, is sort of like doesn't make sense anymore, unless they have like significant vendor lock-in, which no one actually likes. It's not like a nice thing. And so I would think you'd see like a finer segmentation of like software markets in general, and I think you see that as well. It's like teams are like, we have 5 people, we're profitable, we've raised 500K, why do we need to scale up? Why do we need to hire 20, 30 marketing sales agents or something like that?
Yeah.
And so maybe like the addressable market for like it's kind of like the best time to be like solopreneur or small scrappy bootstrap team, Levels.io styles type stuff. That's like the golden age of that kind of thing. And I think people, like, if you're looking for like what is this durable moat that will last into the future and command high margins and premiums, probably there may be some kind of hardware element. And hardware has historically had like tough margins, difficult to scale, manufacturing, supply chain issues, this kind of stuff. But if you have the hardware platform and then a software-defined value generation layer, you can have software-like moats with the you can have software-like margins with the hardware moat.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd pay more for the software on this car than the like installment on it.
Yeah, that's a great example like that. Ultimate example is like Starlink, SpaceX kind of thing, where it's like the moat is having massive heavy lift, low Earth orbit access, like huge volumes of that. Useful. And so of course they deploy their constellation first, and like Kuiper constellation by Amazon or whatever, or other competing like telecom sat constellations don't have that. And so so SpaceX can kind of win the obvious super large market for like internet-based comms, which is like the consumer internet. It's like other people like Astronis, like they can launch a few satellites into geosync orbit, and they can be middle mile fiber optic providers to like small governments, something like that. But like obviously the far larger market is like consumer internet. But to service that, you need to have a lower flying constellation with like a lower average satellite lifetime, all this kind of stuff, because it's based on like the communication cell size. Anyway, yada yada yada. There's a few. I think there's a big shift already in that, where people are much more interested in like manufacturing, aerospace, defense is this whole new category that has a lot of hype and interest. But actually, it's actually not true that venture has kind of historically went to this, pure sort of software app layer type stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's always had an active biotech sector, right? And so biotech kind of carried the torch of, like I said, deep tech investing, like actually post, like we have now new hardware, silicon, and the internet. And now you want to think like capital is just seeking a maximum leverage on returns. And so this zero cost of marginal replication with this totally blue ocean opportunities in software, it made sense for people to go make tons of money there. And now they can plow that money into more difficult things that maybe actually have a lower total return or internal rate of return, but they may be able to invent new markets entirely. And so I don't know if it's like, if there's going to be this shift in like what the typical returns profile we're looking for here, if it's more moderate sized outcomes but a lower failure rate, or are we still looking for like the SpaceX of the thing that's going to be like the most valuable private company that's like totally unbelievable that it works. I don't know, but I think the deep tech thesis is kind of becoming pretty strong
For sure.
from what I see.
It's really interesting with the biotech stuff, given historically a lot of that has been where venture has gone. The center of gravity for that is arguably Boston, but as biotech becomes more and more tech first and computational, like computational biology and like engineering,
Yeah.
whether software or bioengineering heavy, I'm curious if there's a world where San Francisco becomes the hub for breakthrough biotech innovations.
I mean, San Francisco kind of has been pretty competitive on that front. I mean, the whole South San Francisco Genentech, right?
Yeah.
Genentech was like the first big success story in the venture-backed kind of biotech world, kind of invented the world, you know, of whatever. So I think it's still pretty strong. I think Boston, from what I've heard, it has kind of like this reputation of like much harsher terms on more predatory kind of ownership targets on funds and stuff like that or whatever. And I think that's probably changing over time. But yeah, I mean, Boston and SF both have kind of like biotech hubs, both kind of centers of that, and then also like Switzerland, and then maybe like, I don't know, some people think say San Diego or something like that, but not sure. Yeah, people sort of, you kind of have to grow to feel like a university ecosystem in some sense, and so like the whole Cambridge, MIT, Harvard thing makes a lot of sense, where there's like a lot of like, biotech has so much like fundamental scientific research involved in it, so it kind of makes sense. But then the Bay Area also has like Berkeley, UCSF, which is big in bio, Stanford, so it has its own kind of like research hub type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure like if sort of which center is like growing rapidly or faster, or if they're both neck and neck or whatever. I think it's kind of irrelevant. Like you can probably do something either place, and funds that like are actively. So biotech has a different. It's a different deep tech kind of fund strategy model, because there's a very well-worn path of like, you know, sort of mouse model or target discovery or identification, mouse model studies, animal studies, preclinical testing, trials, whatever, clinical trials.
Yeah.
Like, that's a very well-worn pipeline. And there's now like funds that are almost like mercenary funds or companies that just exist in a certain cycle, a certain stage of that life cycle. Like they are just scanning the academic literature for like new promising targets on, say, rare genetic diseases. This is like BridgeBio, for example. And they just have like, you know, crack squads of people that are like, oh yeah, we've taken like, you know, 8 molecules through the clinical trial pipeline, and we just get it to this certain point to an acquisition by like one of these large pharmas.
Yeah.
Because what the large pharmas have realized, I think, is that they actually suck at discovery and fundamental research, and what they are more is like clinical testing and then production and distribution engines.
Yeah.
And so they've outsourced their kind of early stage, top of funnel drug discovery programs to smaller companies, and it's kind of like a risk isolation thing. So they basically outsource that risk into like the early stage venture kind of allocation process, where it's like, are you willing to bet on this thing before it has a whole bunch of substantial weight behind it? And then they can kind of pick the winners from that. But then they have like the massive revenue engine behind them, and so the exit for the early stage investors is maybe like, oh, we betted on this thing and we took it from the lab. Like, this is the big thing, from lab to kind of some stage of commercialization, and then it gets picked up and sucked up into the pharma empire. So very few, like, I think, sort of next generation biotech companies are trying to like target actually becoming like a next, you know, pharma prime, like a next Merck or Pfizer or whatever. I think like Mammoth Biosciences is like one of those where it's like, what if we actually build like a new like mega pharma firm from the ground up using this kind of modern science thing? I don't know if that's like working or not, but it's like ambitious, you know?
Yeah, I think the one of the 3 components of their company is like the foundry, I believe, which is highly focused on like the quality of scientists within the company. And it's interesting looking at the full spectrum of like biotech or tech bio companies, ranging from companies like latch, which are providing infrastructure for computational biology, to other approaches, which are, okay, we want to be the next Pfizer or Merck.
Yeah.
And we're thinking, okay, what tech advantages can we use to achieve that?
Yeah.
The thing you're mentioning on the sort of tried and true pathway for new drug discovery, I think is obviously changing. I know you've spoken a bit on this before with in silico research and simulation, like discovery through simulations.
Yeah.
Where do you think that's headed, and at what point do you think we have the cusp between simulation into like actual trials on patients?
Right. I would say like I'm not confident that I have like any kind of expert opinion on that topic, but I can just kind of give my like hot take, I guess, like that. There's probably been a lot of hype around this in silico research model that I don't know has actually borne like substantial fruit, at least for like sort of ab initio or like completely novel kind of stuff. Certainly for things like molecular dynamic simulations, that is like much more targeted, where they already understand maybe what mechanism they're trying to do. But it's like, you know, like we're probably at such a like a poor level of like understanding the full gamut of like gene expression and like, you know, these kind of protein interaction pathways that we can actually like take a cell, or let alone a tissue type or an organism, and simulate it in some meaningful capacity. I think like the goal is always like, can you narrow down the search space in the earliest stages of like drug target kind of identification process, because that's like so big, right? It's like 10,000 candidates and then maybe one is good or something. Yeah, I think probably it's like the general case is like, I would guess the more specific the use case you have in mind, the more leverage simulation tools can bring to bear. But for like completely new kind of stuff, you don't capture all of like higher order dynamics that would enable you to discover something. I'm not sure if it's something where, you know, it's like we just throw more compute at it and then suddenly it just turns on. I am pretty bullish.
So question.
Yeah.
Say we had infinite compute and the models were excellent, and we were to flip a switch and all of a sudden 10,000 new drugs are discovered that work, that are incredibly impactful, and now we need to actually get them out into the market. How much of the problem do you think is the actual drug discovery versus the process of pushing the drug through FDA and the entire commercialization process?
Yeah, well, that's probably like actually the harder part, I would think, you know. Yeah. And it's always like, can it be manufactured at scale, right? And so like the highest performing things are like biologics, like small molecule discovery. Has it been like farmed out entirely, or is it like all the low-hanging fruit is gone? And so, you know, how do you produce those at scale, at high purity, and how long do they last? What's their shelf life? So the production issues are very non-trivial, I think. And then also like, you know, understanding like toxicity and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, I'm like really not an expert on any of this in any stretch of the imagination. So
It seems like you've gone pretty deep on a few different core like sciences, whether it's physics, a little bit of biology.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I've had a weird.
How do you think about I mean, the intersection of physics and biology perhaps is consciousness. How do you think about the like physics of consciousness and how that comes into play with like those two fields that you're pretty interested in?
Yeah, that's a good one. As far as I can tell, there's something weird about consciousness and observers specifically, and this is borne out in a lot of like, you know, fairly well documented studies. There's always people that are going to say that study's bullshit, it's fake, whatever. Sure, I don't know. But it does seem like there is some weirdness around conscious observers and their ability to influence the outcome of quantum mechanical processes. And even at like statistically significant levels, you know, like even influencing the outcome of random number generators. There's lots of like weird studies around these phenomena that point to something there that is not part of what we think of as like conventional base case or classical reality. I would say also that this field of quantum biology, right? So it's like for a long time there was not even very well established evidence that any coherent quantum mechanic processes was occurring in biological systems until there's this discovery in photosynthesis, this kind of like quantum mechanical processes involved in that. And there's tons of more stuff in this. And so we have this model of cognition that is just entirely based on neural network activation and firing, and that's now something we've captured very well in like machine learning models. And we have something that looks like a facsimile of intelligence. It has at least like very good factual recall. Does it have true reasoning? Can it actually make new discoveries? Those things seem to be answered no at this point in time. And the question I think is, are there non-neural network based cognitive information processing going on in brain tissue that may be using like or may have like quantum mechanical effects associated with them, or be leveraging those things? And I think there's actually lots of reasons to suppose that. There's lots of measurements and new studies coming out, a lot to do with like things like biophotonic emission, and sort of like coherent states that can exist in certain molecular orbitals of like tryptophan proteins and microtubules. Like the whole microtubule
Interesting
thing is kind of I think probably going to be born out to be correct in the future.
Let's talk about the tryptophans. So those appear in certain states. Those states can be induced if we take certain compounds.
You mean psychedelic drugs?
Yes, potentially.
Yeah. Nobody in San Francisco does that.
No
tech bro would ever do that.
Yeah, that would be wrong. I mean, they're Schedule 1 substances, so obviously if they're banned, we're not going to do them.
Yeah.
Because the government told us. But for theoretically, say someone was to take them, one of the experiences I hear people have is a feeling of interconnectedness, or almost as though their consciousness is merged with that of some form of greater collective consciousness of sorts.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any like quantum physics as explanation for that level of interconnectedness?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think there's this thing people do, which is just to say like any weirdness in the world, we're just gonna call quantum because it like doesn't make sense or something. And it's like, it's quantum, guys. Like it has to be. And I don't know. Like my sort of like very earlier career technical stuff was like RF engineering. Just classic RF engineering, and it's all electromagnetic waves. And like, do you need to have quantum mechanical effects for you to feel connected with the environment, or to even have like telepathic experiences? And no, like those could just be like a very simple mental model is like, there's tons of electrical activity in my brain in the sort of tens to hundreds of hertz range, but there's lots of like sort of active RF structures that are in the kilohertz to terahertz range, and those wavelengths can just like pass right through the kind of cerebrospinal fluid or whatever and interact with the environment, and everything is emitting these things. And there's tons of studies on this that like actually measure like low amounts of frequency coming out of the brain in those wavelengths that are just not explained by like the kind of frequency of action of like synaptic firing. And so it's like you could have this, you could have like a oneness with nature, but really it's just like I am somehow coupled in with this EM field or something without having any kind of quantum weirdness. And I say EM stuff just because it's like, at some point it's like, whatever the hell's going on, in your brain, it's not really explained by gravitational forces. It's probably not based entirely on like like weak or strong nuclear forces. It's electromagnetism. Like the world we live in is just dominated by electromagnetic interactions. Like everything on the planet, all of our electronics and chemistry is essentially that. Like very few things actually use like forces besides that. Like nuclear power is an exception or something, but yeah. So I think basically it's like this electromagnetic, whatever the nature of experience and cognition is, like conceptualizing it as like entirely dominated by electromagnetic forces, I think is probably pretty accurate heuristically speaking. And then having this kind of connection with or this receival or perception of information coming external to the person could also be explained by like classical physics. But it's not to say that it's like it rules out any quantum mechanical phenomenon or effects. It's in the quantum mechanical stuff is where you get these things like theories of time going both directions, and this sort of like potentially superluminal information transmission through entanglement or something like that. Although there's lots of things that say like actually can't transmit information itself like any meaningful bits faster than the speed of light, but the entanglement will still like have this correlation between two distant, separated states.
The entanglement stuff gets me wondering if there's any potential that there's particles within all of us that are entangled with particles in someone else. I don't really know if that's
Interesting.
practical.
Yeah.
But the whole like spooky action at a distance thing makes me wonder if that's potentially a form of basis for like collective consciousness, or basically what are physical. I mean, the electromagnetic stuff is interesting because you can control things at a distance with that.
Yeah.
And we know that physics-wise to be true. Same thing with quantum entanglement is you can, control things at a distance to the point that you're making. And so I'm curious, like, what other physical phenomena could explain interconnectedness of things that aren't necessarily like directly connected.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, that's where the RF antenna model kind of breaks down, where people have like these experiences, like they're separated by thousands of miles, and somehow they knew something was up or something. Or everyone has little stories like these anecdotes of like, they were thinking of their friend, and the friend called them right then, or they were sad, their mom called them, or some synchrony of timing of things. The hardcore materialist skeptic view is that those are absolutely just like observation bias and spurious sort of associational thinking, and all the times where things didn't line up synchronized, you ignored it, it didn't register, but this coincidence you're keyed into, and people are always finding patterns and noise, just bias like that. And like, sure, that's like one way to explain it, but then some people just like swear by this stuff and they live their life by it and they fully embrace it and accept it, and it's like, okay, well, are they just like completely wrong about how to live their own life or something? I don't know. I think it's sort of, I don't know if there's been like super conclusive, compelling studies that say like, I mean, the telepathy tapes, this stuff was pretty interesting. I haven't actually like seen those, but it kind of like broke this to the mainstream in a lot of ways, where it's like, maybe there's some spooky stuff going on. And I'd say just like, I wouldn't be surprised if there is, because
Okay, let's dig into that. So what is something that is superstitious or perhaps a little bit irrational on paper that you think may actually have some form of scientific basis or could be plausibly true?
Well, there's tons of things, because I'm actually like totally insane. I just covered up very well. I would say there's this whole like kind of world of absolutely insane stuff that some people are just completely obsessed with, and other people just deny the existence of entirely. I would say things like psionic effects or psionic phenomena like telepathy and this kind of this paranormal cognition is definitely one category, that kind of stuff. I think like this whole alien UFO UAP thing is another thing, where it's like some people have experiences and they're like, that's changed my life forever, and oh my god, the world should know about this, yada yada yada, and other people are like, that's completely fake, I don't believe it at all. And it's incredible to the extent to which people live in these like completely isolated universes from each other, where it's like people over here, like they just do not think about that at all, and other people, that's like their whole life. So it's hard to think like well, so the question was things that are superstitious that may actually be useful or true in some sense. Well, okay, so yeah, this is funny. There's this great phrase or quote that's like kind of all theories or models are wrong, but some are useful, right? And so it's like, like kind of people that are super into astrology, and they derive a lot of meaning from that, and it actually helps them make sense of things in ways that is like emotionally progressive or self-developmental.
Yeah.
Are we going to come along and say like, oh, you're completely wrong and all of that was fake and whatever? And it's like, sure, you could say that, I guess, but if it's useful for them in navigating certain situations of ambiguity or finding a greater degree of moral alignment or meaning or purpose, then kind of it's actually useful in that sense. So it's actually serving a purpose or a function. I'd say that ultimately, like, if there are such ways of kind of leveraging things that essentially nobody believes in but are true and useful, you should be able to kind of achieve insane things in the world, right? Like that's the obvious. Like if you can read people's minds, you should be able to like nail every fundraising round or customer discussion or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
let's see it do it, right? That's like, the proof is in the pudding. So
one of the things about the scientific method is that it's generally geared towards disproving things, and so inherent to that is an incentive to try to find why something won't work or isn't accurate.
yeah,
I'm curious what a version of science would look like where you're actively trying to like prove things to be true that we know are likely false, right? Like, what kind of stretch of the imagination would you need to take for astrology to be true? And if you started looking at things, of course, there's concerns with that where there's confirmation bias that comes into play. I think there's so many reasons why the disprovability is so integral to the scientific process, but I do wonder what would happen if we had a combination of both, where we actively tried to prove things were true, and then once we've found one or two potential hypotheses, then go into like the rigorous scientific method approach.
Well, I mean, I guess the word on the street is that's already happening, especially if you look at things like a lot of like LK99 research. Like, those guys obviously wanted it to be true. Like, they want that to be true, and so they're biased towards thinking it's true, and they will interpret evidence to support that conclusion. You know.
Do you think with the LK99 thing, despite it being untrue,
well, that is yet to be determined. What we know for sure is that nobody successfully replicated the experiment to have a sample of high purity. There was follow-up studies in other universities that had claims along the lines of, and this is like a year and a half later, something like that. I googled this like a month ago. I was like, whatever happened to that? And they're saying it's like, well, actually, it may be possible that there are grains of this material that are growing on like the tens of nanometer scale, but it's incredibly difficult to obtain at high purity. So I don't actually know. I think it didn't meet the bar of like standards of professional science and stuff like that, in the sense like the plots sucked and like the whatever. It was like, does this make sense? It was kind of like not this commonly accepted theory. But I would say in that case, though, people want that to be true. The world wants that because it's like this whole new era of like everything, like computing and power generation, and like everything changes forever, for the best, like in the best possible sense.
And I'm sure people are inspired by it and thinking, well, what are the requisites necessary for it to now be true?
Yes.
So I'm not sure that large public failures are necessarily a bad thing for the morale of scientists. If anything,
they are. Yep. Actually, that's why so many scientists during that whole saga were so cautious and hesitant, because they realized like a giant public flop would be terrible for their field and their grant application process. See, I think this is actually like kind of a flaw in the current system, is that I think professional scientists are essentially terrified of being wrong. Like, there's nothing worse for them to be wrong and to publish something where they're actually wrong, and the reputation's destroyed, because it's this weird reputation game, and it's like the worst, and that trickles down into these academic departments and grad programs with like toxic abuse, but it's all reputation based. You can't really say anything, and yada yada yada. So I think very few scientists are like actually daring to like say things that are controversial, or may not be completely correct. That's maybe good because it's like a higher bar for publication standards, but then that's kind of not really true. Rather, you just get tons of fraudulent studies that get published and retracted years later, like happened in Alzheimer's, and has actually happened in superconductivity before as well. So it's kind of like, actually, I think everyone's pretty aware, like the scientific academic model based in universities is like,
how do you
sort of
think
messed up.
engineering cultures are different than scientific cultures?
Yeah. Okay. I would say it this way: is between points A and B. Let's say we're starting from scratch and we want to have a, rocket or something going to space.
That would be cool.
Yeah. The scientist approach would be like, how do we like maximize the like publication surface area along that path, so that we can like kind of blanket the territory with future citations for ourselves, and like maximize the amount of grant funding we can get. And so if there's like novel, interesting things that come up, weird little things, and we'll explore those, and we'll have this whole panoply of different experiments, and we'll kind of iterate each time. And so it's like kind of a tree structure where it's like tons of branches kind of stop in the next layer of the tree, there's more branches, and then ultimately you just take like kind of one path. Whereas the engineering is like, that's retarded, let's just get to the point of the rocket working as fast as possible, and if there's stuff that's off the shelf we can buy, let's do that, and if there's other weird stuff that's not working, shelve it and just keep going. And it's way more like results oriented versus like novelty oriented. Because for this the science perspective is we're just looking for new stuff, and we actually don't know ahead of time what's going to be what, right? They're fully discovery mode. You know, it's the difference between you know, am I in customer discovery mode, am I in science discovery mode, or am I in like time to build and scale mode, you know? And so, you know, as an engineer, you actually don't want to like build for scale before you know what it's going to be, you know? So you want to like prototype iteratively, figure out that search space. And this is the thing with a lot of customer discovery as well, is that you know, like Slack started off as a video game, and the messaging service is something the team built internally just to handle their own comms. And then they turn it into this whole thing, right? So you don't really know ahead of time, like in the science perspective, it's like, what is the actual discovery here? All you know is you're searching in a particular kind of idea space or territory. Whereas engineering, it's like, we have the need well documented. Now it's about finding the best solution to that. So it's, yeah, very, very different, I think.
There's this concept that YC sort of talks about, which is a solution in search for a problem, where you start
it's
with
the worst, yes. It's called having a PhD in a topic.
That I think that's kind of the problem, is what if you make a scientific breakthrough and then you're like, all right, cool, what do I do with this?
That's the worst position to be in, I think, honestly. Yeah, because it's now you're no longer like this word orthogonal to whatever, right? Like you're just so heavily biased, like you have to use this patent for something because you invest. It's like massive sunk cost fallacy. You know, the best position to be in is, I know the problem super well, and now I'm gonna very just, you know, just blankly canvas around for the best solution, and I'm not emotionally tied to any one thing being the best solution, so I can actually assess them equally on their merits. If you've spent your life savings on a golden hammer, it's brutal, you know, or the best years of your 20s or whatever. You could have been going to Coachella, dude. But that's kind of like the wrong mindset. Usually, like the PhD thing, it's like you've trained yourself to be a rigorous researcher, you know, very methodical. You're able to take on like the serious problems that take many years to solve, and that's kind of its own skill set versus like the specific thing you happen to do for that.
I think it's just easier to go to Coachella.
It's more fun.
It's more fun.
Yeah, the terms are more transparent.
40%, or was it 60% of Coachella tickets are bought using buy now, pay later, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Crazy, dude. I'm gonna finance my influencer Olympics spot. I've actually never been to Coachella.
I have not either. Next year?
I don't know, dude. I'm not sure if it's my scene. It's just like,
I think we'll find some like brilliant founders and engineers there.
Possibly, yeah. I do.
It's where they aggregate, I hear.
Yeah,
it's like TechCrunch.
People should party more, I think.
I agree.
I think that's something special about SF, is a lot of interesting things actually happen at these parties.
Completely agree.
Sometimes they don't, but it's you know, it's the social scene is like interesting. It's small in some ways, and very densely connected.
I'm curious, during different renaissances of sorts, was there a lot of partying?
You'd think so. You'd hope so.
Yeah, it was probably lit.
I mean, yeah, dude, the Medicis probably went super hard. Yeah.
So, if during a lot of these renaissances we had polymaths being the people that pioneered innovation, why do you think we have this culture in San Francisco of like hyper-focused, verticalized sort of approaches to career and life?
I think there's a lot of obviously wrong and sort of bankrupt narratives guiding people through life, that it's sort of part of the whole game to figure out is how to like reject, dispel those, and figure out for yourself what's true, and learn to be guided by an inner light. I think there's also this kind of like, it's just this fact of specialization in like in a very large economy, where it's like being a specialist kind of you can kind of just like show up anywhere and earn a very high salary and not have to think too hard about things like that are like very meta level, you know. But like I think the generalist is the person that's more adept to sort of running the organization or building the thing from scratch. It's actually, it's like, it's way better to be a multi-tool than the scalpel for that purpose, because you have to do so many different functions. And sometimes all you like, the degree of experience you actually need is more to know the difference between something being done well or being done badly, not being able to do it at a world-class level. Because to get to the point where you can discern quality, maybe like 2,000 hours, but to become the expert takes like 10 or 20,000 hours. And so it's just not worth it. Like, that's the thing with this PhD Golden Hammer thing. It's like, if I know the problem very well, I can just go hire whoever PhD did their thing in that topic. And if they weren't actually right about their approach, I can find the person that was. Whereas the person that went and spent the 20,000 hours to become that expert in the thing, they are now, much more like, is it this kind of scalpel or that kind of scalpel? Yeah.
There is a special breed of person, though, and I think this is where we have the distinction between a polymath and a generalist, is they're just incredibly good at everything. Like, they could be PhDs in multiple different fields, and I think that's pretty inspiring, because doing any one of those things is already quite difficult.
Yeah.
But generally, the people that are most impressive, that have achieved one remarkable thing, have often achieved more than one remarkable thing.
Right.
And so while I don't think you should have your attention completely diffuse against, tens of different things, I'd be curious what would happen if, instead of a hyper-focused culture, we had like a bifocal culture, where we were like, what are the two things you care about a lot? Maximum, what are like the three things you're and what's cool about that is then you have so many more permutations of possible like things to combine.
Well, I think sort of AI tool, it's kind of like the golden age of the generalist, right? Because you have on-demand specialist knowledge, and now it's more like the advantages in the connectionist thinking of how am I going to link these things together into a coherent something. Versus like, I don't need to memorize all the biology textbooks, so long as I have some ideas of how I'm going to fit that together with this. I'm designing a fluorescent microscope or whatever. I know where to look for information. I know enough to implement it. I don't have to like maybe master this field of optics myself and all these design rules. If there's like a bunch of design tools that can kind of do that for me, I just know where to look and know how to like see if it worked correctly.
It's interesting, the toggling back and forth kind of pendulum swing between societies that favor more like hunter-gatherer like approaches, and then societies that favor more farming like approaches. So I think over the past 10 years, being hyper-focused, or perhaps a neurodivergence of autism, may have been incredible in the tech industry. I'm curious if we'll potentially see a lot of like brilliant technologists that are ADHD.
Yeah. Or maybe just more artistic, And it's kind of this shift of like to be artistic, part of it is skill, part of it is aesthetic taste. And if you democratize access to the skill or the means of art production or technology production, then you compete on aesthetics, which is kind of interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah, because not everyone has time to like learn to play the violin or something. It's very challenging and difficult. But if you can just have that ear for music, the Rick Rubin vibe coder, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of that, and that's actually kind of awesome, because it's like, it's just, you're just vibing and you're just doing stuff and it's fun, and you're, it's like, we kind of have abstracted away so much of the tedium, but that's always been like the advantage of like this kind of new technology. Like, people used to spend a lot of their time like washing clothes and like making bread and stuff, and like you don't do that anymore.
I think also the people that are attracted to software engineering now are probably less technical than they may have been 30 years ago. And so with every layer of additional abstraction, you end up having creativity continue to be a more premium skill.
It's a blessing and a curse. There's this short story, or this book, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and they have this, like, in the far future, there's this like Eloi, this like childlike race of aristocrats that are just useless and don't know how anything works. And then you have the Morlocks that actually like work in the machinery and eat Eloi at night. So you don't want like tech Eloi that are people who like they just vibe code shit. They don't know how anything actually works.
Yeah.
They can't fix anything that's broken. They have no like design philosophy or principles, or it's a kind of like,
yeah, no, I totally get your
yeah.
Actually, on what you said earlier on art, do you have any like artistic interests or?
Oh yeah.
Totally.
I think writing for me is like kind of my biggest like creative outlet. Yeah, I've been writing like a lot of science fiction lately, which has been fun, and I'll try to publish that sometime over the next couple months.
I hate the term creative outlet because it almost feels like it subjugates doing creative things as like a way to release emotion, or just like, oh, it's a way to just get rid of
right.
It almost gives me the vibe of like a hobby.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it out of my system or something. Yeah. No, I mean it's one way in which I express myself.
I like that more.
Yeah. I think my friends label me this way as well, very much like artist kind of guy type Pokemon, whatever. Which I like. I'm not like actually an artist in any sense. I don't like paint or whatever, but I think that's like kind of just being creative and having fun with stuff. I mean, I do this like event stuff now. That's like pretty fun, and I'll grow that into something neat. And yeah, I think the net for society is, with these AI tools especially, is how to be more agentic and more creative, and create things for yourself as well and for other people, right? This is this like trap of specialization, is that to be a specialist you have to live and exist in a hierarchy. And so if you can escape the specialist role, then you don't have to live in a hierarchy, and you can have smaller team size. You can have a company of 5 people and everyone's doing what they want or whatever, and it exists autonomously and a lot more like degrees of freedom and self-direction. I kind of don't think this is like a good future of everyone is grinding 110 hours a week and trying to make it in the world. Like, that kind of sucks, actually.
Yeah.
We probably don't need to get there. There's always going to be people that are just insane and want to do that anyway, and we are thankful for that, because they are the sort of, whatever, the martyrs on the altar of work. But for most people, I think they want to just have creative outlets and have fun, enjoy things, not do work they resent. Yeah, but like 30% of women in America, this is like in the 50s, 60s, at some point they had worked as a telephone switchboard operator, right? And we're not like bemoaning the loss of like this noble telephone switchboard operator career path, and oh my God, and society was much better when we had telephone switchboard operators. And so there's going to be more waves of automation, of creative destruction, and people will be like, oh, what about that job category? And then you talk to people in that job category, it's like, do you love this? Is it your passion to drive trucks? I mean, I know that's a good profession, but if there's something better, you could be at home with your family more and have more physical exercise and not get like sunburns on one side of your body. Maybe they would do that instead, So I don't know. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of changes to come, but I think it's going to be for the best overall.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it.
Yeah.
And I'm also excited to see society start to have more philosophical discussions as opposed to just hyper pragmatic conversations on like, how do I fix problem?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, it's always kind of a luxury. But yeah, well, you should come to Deep Tech Week, dude.
I would absolutely love to. I'm there.
June 22nd to 27th.
do you know a guy that could get me in?
Yeah, no, just whatever you want. I'll just get you in.
Epic, man.
Yeah, totally.
Dude, I'm looking forward to it. Was such a pleasure, man. Looking forward to Deep Tech Week. I was actually on the Hornet yesterday.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Okay, sick.
It was awesome.
For
man.
What?
It was a climate tech and I guess some of it was AI, but it was mostly like climate tech event. Yeah.
Well, we're gonna do that party again this year in June 22nd. I'm already like booking it out and like
Okay.
special permit stuff, and so it'll be dope. We'll do it once a year.
Let's do it.
It'll be good.
I'm stoked for it.
All right.
See you, man.
See you, man. It's great.
Perfect, man. That was fun. See ya.